Let's begin with our top story. The U.S. says it will not defend Kurdish-led SDF forces from Turkish attacks in northern Syria. Pentagon officials say U.S. forces have evacuated 2 observation posts in Syria along the Turkish border. In a statement, the White House said Ankara will now be responsible for all ISIS fighters captured in the area in the last 2 years. It said having defeated the so-called ISIS caliphate, U.S. forces will no longer be in the immediate area. Meanwhile, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said Ankara is determined to clear the border region of terrorists and ensure Turkey's security. The SDF said the withdrawal is a breach of commitments by the U.S. that will have an extremely negative impact on the war against ISIS. The developments came hours after a phone call between President Erdogan and his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump. Earlier, Russian President Putin announced the end of conflict operations in Syria and called for a political solution. We're going to go firstly now to Moscow, where we're joined by our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thanks for joining us. Now, President Erdogan, Ross, regularly interacts with Russian President Vladimir Putin as a key military and diplomatic ally of the Syrian government. How would Moscow view a Turkish incursion?
This actually might play positively for Moscow if this goes ahead, this Turkish incursion into northeastern Syria. One thing that Moscow has said is that Kurdish rights must be respected, but that respect must come under a single state. So Russia wants to see the return to Syrian control by Damascus, President Bashar al-Assad, of all of Syria. The territorial integrity of Syria as it was in 2011, before the start of the civil war, must be returned to government control, and that would include the Kurdish-controlled areas in northeastern Syria, respecting the rights of Kurdish people in that area, but that they must accept that the Syrian government will eventually have control of those Kurdish-run areas. Moscow has been readying itself for a possible mediation role when it comes to this. Now, the Kurds may see themselves abandoned, perhaps, by the US on one hand, if the US is going to step aside, not stand in the way of any possible Turkish incursion. The Kurds then may look to Moscow for more support, saying, well, can you help us? Could you guarantee our security? Moscow, of course, would say, well, if we can, it's going to be coming through the control of the Syrian government. So obviously, as you said, Russia is a major backer of the Assad regime, and Turkey supports the anti-Assad regime, but they have been working together also, as you mentioned, on other projects.
Well, Ross, what impact would Turkish military action then have on the Astana process, political negotiations on Syria's future?
Well, one issue that the Russian and Turkish presidents seem to have overcome is the fact that, as I mentioned, they support different sides in the conflicts. And over the several years where we've had Russia supporting the Assad regime and Turkey supporting those anti-government rebels, that hasn't totally impacted on their cooperation, along with Iran, in the Astana framework. We've seen regular commitments and regular meetings in Turkey, Russia, to try to guarantee this framework will work as they try to build towards possible peace negotiations for the end of the deal, for the end of the war. Some kind of peace deal may come out of this. So that doesn't seem to have impacted on the Putin-Erdogan working relationship. This problems on the ground in Syria, if you like, hasn't impacted their relationship so far. So it doesn't seem to be under particular threat at the moment, that Putin-Erdogan friendship.
Ross, thank you for your reporting today. That was Ross Cullen speaking to us from Moscow. Let's now get some analysis on this story. We're joined now by Ahmed Alialu, who is a political analyst based in Turkey. Ahmed, thank you for your time today. How likely, Ahmed, is it that a Turkish military operation will begin in northeast Syria anytime soon?
It must be clear that Turkey is not conducting any operation against the Kurdish people. It is basically against the PKK and its offshoot, the YPG and the SDF in Syria. So Turkey doesn't have any problem with the Kurdish population in the region, whether in Turkey, in Iraq, in Syria, or anywhere. There are lots of ministers in the cabinet in Turkey who are Kurdish. There are lots of the members of the ruling AK party who are Kurdish. So the problem is basically with those who choose to pick up arms against the government, and that is the PKK and its own organizations like the YPG in Syria. And that's why Turkey is determined to go ahead with the operation. This is the third cross-border operation in which Turkey will try to clear its border from these elements who are terrorists, launching a terrorist attack against Turkish people and Kurdish people in the southern parts of Turkey.
Well, Ahmed, as you well know, the U.S. and others say a Turkish operation east of the Euphrates would in fact create a space for ISIS revival. What are your thoughts on that?
It's not true. At the very beginning, Turkey vowed that it's ready to fight ISIS and Daesh with the help of the United States and any other power. They said to the ally in Washington that you cannot turn a blind eye on the terrorist attacks that is happening against Turkey by these elements, the YPG elements. So Daesh can be defeated, and Turkey succeeded to defeat Daesh at the very beginning of the rise of Daesh in Kobani, Ain al-Arab in Syria. And then the Washington or the Americans, they decided to choose the YPG as their ally to defeat Daesh, while Turkey was always asking them to try Turkey, and if they didn't succeed, then they can move to any other ally they want on the ground. But the problem is, again, the United States is not taking the sensitivity of this issue seriously. Till this moment, they understand that Turkey will go ahead with the operation regardless of any concerns of the United States. And Turkey understands the geopolitics, or especially now what's happening in the United States and the Trump's status to go ahead with the operation. It's a very good timing for Turkey to start to embark on the operation very soon, I believe.
All right, we'll leave it there at that, Ahmed. But of course, as always, we appreciate you taking your time out to speak to us here at Indus News.